Hi there, and welcome to another episode of 411 Pop Culture. This is your host, Justin Steele. With me again is Jon Gallagher, and we are going to be talking about Game of Thrones, Season 8, Episode 6, the series finale. Now, while I wasn't pleased with everything, I definitely understand, there's a lot of complaints in the past week or so that they were mad how people were mad about Dany, about the way the show was going. Whatever I felt about that, I don't think that a 500,000 people petition signing thing is necessary. I don't think it was anywhere near that problematic that, people wanted to, push out the writers. But I do think that, or at least in terms of they were like, well, Dany, this wasn't who she is, etc. I think that the seeds for anything was always there. And I do have to ask, what show were you watching if you felt that way? Because I feel like the show was set up, even by George R. R. Martin in the books. He has said that all the moments and scenes were all based on historical items that happened, and then he kind of subverted them to become what if this person had won instead of this. So the foundation of this show, in my opinion, has always been they're going to go for what is different than what's expected. And I think that they did that. And so even saying that, though, it's kind of like watching it, you almost expect them to do something different than what's expected. But I still thought like Dany was always capable of this. And in the previous episode, after what happened to Missandei and everything, I kind of thought, yeah, I want her to fight back and do something crazy because I'm pissed right now that they killed Missandei, and I'm upset that we lost the dragon. And so everybody was upset. I've noticed over the past week with how that went, and I think I just expected more of that, and that's kind of what we got. But what did you think, Jon? How did you feel about the episode?
I mean, sort of disappointed
Yeah.
in how it turned out. I mean, it kind of hit all the beats that I expected it to hit, but it was just, I don't know, it's 9 years leading up to this. It's kind of hard to trump expectations, I guess.
Sure. I think they did bring a lot of moments full circle. I guess what I find problematic about it is that for bringing everything full circle, it's almost this time in a way of well, what was kind of the point?
Mm-hmm.
We had this sort of mythology following Jon Snow the whole time where it was he is, the long lost heir, and it's this sort of mysterious thing, and it was sort of the big thing for it to be sort of anticlimactic, and it didn't matter at all that he
Yeah.
was. What? That's the kind of thing that again, I feel secure in the knowledge. A lot of people have said Game of Thrones is the greatest show of all time. I mean, I'm sure you're kind of on that boat, or were, at least until this episode. But I remain secure in the knowledge that 6 Feet Under is actually the greatest show of all time, in my opinion. I think it had a complete arc, complete ending, etc. But I will say, Game of Thrones had a lot of entertaining moments, but there were a lot of moments along the way I was frustrated with. I was always kind of like, well, who are we supposed to be following then? Is it just going to be the evil side always wins? Along the way, that I'm like, okay, so we're following Jon Snow and Dany and Arya and Sansa. I kind of started to finally figure it out in Tyrion. But then it's kind of, oh, we're just going to kind of red wedding you again in a way where it's like, oh, everybody that you followed all along, now that's, Jon's not going to become the ultimate king, nor is Dany, nor is this. And almost in a, I don't say, I wasn't depressed. Again, I was sort of whatever about it. Like, okay, I guess that's how it's ending. I guess that's what it all was leading to. But,
Yeah.
so what, is there anything you wish had happened differently? Do you wish that Jon had become king? Do you wish that Jon and Dany had, got past their issues and everything worked out?
It's kind of hard to say what I expected from this episode. I felt pretty much all season that the pacing was very rushed. I wish that we had more time, more episodes to kind of spread this out a little bit. And I just think going into this, a lot of things had to be tied up really quickly. And I don't think that they were satisfying in how they ended. Jon's basically back up north again.
Well, and now he's like a criminal up north. Before it was sort of like he had this noble reason for joining, and now he's up there because of all the criminals that were, it was always sort of like the Night's Watch started off as this noble thing, but along the years it became
Mm-hmm.
a place where these kind of rotten people go. And not that I think Jon's a criminal per se,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's sort of ironic that that's the reason why now he ultimately ended up there was for committing a crime.
And I think that he's not coming back to Castle Black. I think he's just going to stay with the wildlings
Sure.
as they're traveling north. Like,
Well, I'd like to say before I forget, as far as Tyrion goes, he sort of manipulated, he's almost, I love Tyrion and I rooted for him for a long, long time. But I do think like, he kind of, set Varys up to get kind of punished and manipulated him into being he's the one who took the fall. And then in this episode, he was feeling sorry for himself. He knew what was going to happen, so he kind of was just saying whatever. And of course, in the back of his mind, he knew his only option was to have Dany be killed. And I'm not saying I think he did this maliciously or with intent, but he did set up Jon then to solve his problem, which was get rid of Dany, and that was his chance to live. And it's kind of he did that with Varys, and now he did that with Jon. And in both cases, even Jon the whole time, which I noticed a lot of people also had an issue with, Jon seemed lost the past season. He had such like even when he was sort of ambivalent or staying out of things, he would like, if once he committed, he committed. And this whole season, he just seemed lost, which he did, receive a lot of big information about his heritage. However, he just, he was lost. I think he was almost like the audience's viewpoint where they're kind of like, what's happening? This isn't what I expected, and I just have to keep going. And, he was even like, did I make the right decision? And I don't think he did, only because I think he made a decision in the moment based off of what Tyrion kind of, whether maliciously or not, gently suggested that he do. Do you agree or disagree?
I don't know if Tyrion was intent on manipulating Jon.
Well, I'm saying I don't think he had intent necessarily, but it seems like he kind of did do it. Like it was because of his actions that Jon took this
I
step.
wholeheartedly believe that Tyrion thought it was the right decision for Dany to die based on what she did to King's Landing. He basically told her straight out, "You slaughtered a city.
Hmm.
I freed my brother. You slaughtered a city."
But each of the characters have done, like I was saying before we started this, that like not one character is completely innocent on this show. Everybody's done really horrendous things. For them to all kind of judge Dany, I don't know. I think that's a bit hypocritical. Whether even take somebody, I love Arya. I think she's hands down my favorite character, but she did some evil, quote, things to like seek revenge for her family, to take care of the Freys and all this stuff. And it's like Dany essentially did the same thing. So for her to be judged because she's taking revenge back, her family, her closest family, Missandei, was beheaded and she took revenge. And yeah, a lot of innocent people had died because of it. Because, like, I mean, how do you argue it? They're all there for Cersei, which was in her mindset. If you want to say, well, the Freys are guilty, I mean, not every single one of them guilty. They all acted off of their patriarch's orders. So it's kind of like, how do you kill these guys? And that's okay for Arya, but Dany, it's not okay. And therefore, she's being like judged as this evil character. And I don't think any one of those characters, Tyrion, like he said, he's strangled his lover, he killed his father. What makes anything that they did any different? Because nobody's innocent. Even the innocents are not innocent. What makes it any different than what Dany did that she should be so criticized by all of them is not representing them?
I think that to judge Dany based on this action might seem hypocritical to some, but I mean, going based off the thousands of people she just killed, I believe wholeheartedly that Tyrion thought it was the right decision to make. And when we are judging other people, we don't tend to reflect on ourselves and the actions that we've kind of done in our lives. I think we kind of remove ourselves and our actions when we judge other people.
Well, I would say that to a degree, except then Tyrion did say, though, he's like, how, I did this. I mean, that's what gave me the thought, was when he was like, well, I strangled my lover, I did this. And it is kind of like, I just think Dany was no more or less had done anything differently than they'd all have done. So for her to be so maligned or somehow what she's doing is any worse, I find semi-hypocritical. It's the results happen. But I'm saying that's what I think. Maybe I do agree with you that, like, the show should have been longer. Maybe it was a little rushed. Everybody keeps saying that, and I kind of disagreed. But now that you say it, maybe we could have gotten a little bit more understanding as to why this would be a problem or this. And I do feel it became, because I'm saying that's my problem, like the fact that she was judged so quickly. And so this and this, and I don't think she should have been. But only for those reasons. Ultimately, it gave the result that we had, which is she was killed. And I guess I'm disappointed by that because I would have liked to, like, I was following her story just as much as Jon's. And then it's kind of like, well, who cares anyway, because Jon didn't get it either. He kind of this, but there's so many theories and stuff and leaks, and I always take them with a grain of salt. But the one leak that I heard was that exactly what happened, where this council would be formed and Bran would become the king, and I'm like, oh God, I hope that doesn't happen. And then I'm like, oh God, that's gonna happen, isn't it? And I waited and I waited, and then there it was. How did you feel about that with like Bran and
Indifferent.
yeah, again, I understand what Tyrion was saying, where it's like, oh, a great story or this or that. I find it like that Sam was like, oh, let's give it to the people, and everybody kind of laughed, sort of absurd. Although,
But then they just did the same thing. Like,
sure, I mean,
they
what?
just voted
Well,
for
I
a
hate
leader.
that sort
like,
of thing too, in regular culture, not just pop culture, that people like as soon as you're like, oh, let's give the vote to everybody. Why is it that we all go to like even with gay marriage or this or that? It's always like, well, then why don't we just marry our dogs or our cats? It always goes to that, and I'm like, what is it about human nature that it's if you give another human being, it's still human beings, the rights. It's like, oh, all of a sudden we now have to compare it to somehow an animal or something. And I just in that moment I got a little irritated that they just kind of laughed it off, especially because it's Samuel Tarly, who's like over an abundance of times that he has proven how smart he is. But I don't know, that irritated me in that moment. But that being said, look at our past elections. They've been kind of a mess. So I kind of understand if that's what they meant by that with the laughter, then I get it. But I didn't like the reference to animals. However, yeah, that is ultimately what they did. And I don't know. Like I said, it just was so. I don't have as much of an investment into the show as other people, so I think I can have a little distance where I think some people were like, they're just mad that the show's ending and they're not going to like anything. And I think there's probably a sect of people out there like that. But for me, that's not so. I've become a fan of the show and a relatively big fan. I'm not a super fan, but I do think that even from me, I kind of was, oh, I expected a little bit more out of this finale. But at the same time, I am glad that I can still say that 6 Feet Under, another HBO show, is the greatest show of all time. I just think this show had a lot of great moments and a lot of like, whoa, what the hell moments. And it was entertaining and excellent. And I feel like it was just kind of bleh in the end. And that's too bad. But, I mean, there's not much more to say. I think we're going to talk about some Game of Thrones stuff in the future. And I know that there's more to come. But they had such moments to have such epic ideas, but to see where everybody kind of we waited all these seasons for these Starks to kind of get together, and then they did, and then it was kind of like, well, who cares, because we're all just going to go our own ways anyway, and, I don't know, I expected something different. So, in terms of this episode, like 411 Pop Culture, I apologize to everybody, because we really are just, I don't know what to say about this episode. I'm not, and I think that's what we're saying about it. Is that, yeah, it's almost kind of, I wouldn't say it was boring, but it almost was boring. It was so, like, anticlimactic. That's the word I think I'm looking for. It was anticlimactic.
I wouldn't say it's boring. Like, it didn't bore me. It
right.
just, it's like, okay, this is happening. Like, okay, like, this is happening. As you're going through this episode, you get resolution, but you don't have any satisfaction from these outcomes, because again, I feel like had they given like last season and this season full season runs, you could have had more character development with Dany and Jon. You could have had more character development between all of the characters on the board, and maybe show Dany's decline into this Mad Queen persona.
Well, I didn't like too that it was so like contingent upon Jon. A lot of times this past week I've been defending where I'm like, well, Dany, because a lot of people were getting angry that she was like becoming this sort of villain, and I'm like, well, she still was willing to, up until what happened with her and Jon, be on the good side. Like, so many times that she listened to people and chose the side of good from what they consider, and then she lost a dragon. And then, she came back and still listened to what everybody told her to do and lost another dragon. And then she lost Missandei. And I think she still was willing to do that one more time, but this time she needed some sort of, like, for Jon to be like, okay, I'm going to be here for you. And when he was, I don't know, I don't feel anything for you. He didn't really say anything. She just kind of was like, okay, then F it. I'm going to choose fear and blow up everything. And I think Jon was so lost. I just wish that at some point I could forgive a lot of stuff. And this is stuff that bothers me. You have like an hour and a half episode almost. Like one line or two lines I think could fix a lot. And I wish that Jon could just have been like, hey, listen, I do care about you, but I'm dealing with a lot of stuff right now. I just found out this is who I am and this stuff, and I've had one battle after another, so I need a minute to think about it. But I'm not saying no, I'm not saying yes. I just need to think about it. And it's like it was so he's moping and not saying anything, and then she made a decision and left. And I just feel like these little moments they could have been fixed a lot with one or two sentences explaining why I'm doing what I'm doing exactly.
Or
Like,
maybe more time.
even still, even if you don't have the full thing, just a few little sentences here and there would have fixed a lot of problems. Like, you just had John lost all the time, and I really hated the one thing I did dislike about this episode was you had Dani have her big speech, and then she had her moment with John, and I just would have liked to have a few moments more with her to be like, I don't know, because she's such a character that you've invested. It's not like, and that was the other thing too. I think my problem with the previous episode was Circe. It's so fine. It's fine that she dies, etc. But it's like you want these characters that like have been. It's this ensemble cast that are spread out for so much throughout the years. You want them to kind of for Dani and Circe to be face to face and have Circe be yelled at or face some of her crimes or this or that, and I felt like they just robbed us of all these moments that were so easily could have been done and accomplished. But I mean, is there anything else you have to say about it?
No.
All right, I think that's kind of it. I think it was a disappointing episode. I don't think I was as disappointed as this guy, but I think I get why people are not going to respond so well to it. But what did you think? Were you a fan of how everything played out? Did you agree that you were indifferent about this episode, or were you outright outraged? Let us know. I'm your host, Justin Steele. This is Jon Gallagher, and you're watching 411 Pop Culture, where real people talk about really everything. Have a good one.